Well, this is a whodunit. Everybody likes whodunits, and it's a happy thing. This is really good news, which I'm going to relate to, and we all need good news because there's so much horrible stuff around. Do you all get that feeling that there's something wrong? You don't know what it is, but everything keeps getting worse, and the Russians are coming, and there's bombs on the bridges, and everyone's getting poorer. And I know from personal experience that a pint of beer used to be, in real terms, it cost twice as much now than it did when I first bought one in Callow Youth. And so people are much worse off than the first house that I bought was 3 times the average salary. Now that same house is being sold 10 times the average salary. Everyone thinks they're better off because they can get on a plane and go to Coromandel, but I don't know this because I haven't actually run the maths, only for the essentials of that, beer and a house, but I think the basic hygiene to support life, how much it costs to go to work, to heat the house. I think if you did those maths for those other things, I'm only guessing, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that we're a lot worse off and we're getting worse off. Now, what are the reasons? Everyone has ideas, but wouldn't it be great if there was just one simple reason for all of this to happen, and we could discover it and fix it easily? I've come to understand that there actually is. I've got to get my notes up now. But you can't tackle an enemy if you don't know who it is. If you're being attacked from someone, you don't know where the problem's coming from. You can't understand how it is. And this problem's not politics. But it's good news. It's very good news because I'm convinced that there is a solution. There's 3 parts. I've got to get. I don't know how I'm going to do this in 15 minutes, but there's 3 parts. I'll try and describe the problem. I think I've already done that. And then the solution, and what we're get out of it, if there is a solution. And the solution, I think, is in the way that we receive money. Is anybody in the audience familiar with the phrase fractional reserve banking? Has anyone heard that phrase? We all have now. We all have now. Now, John Maynard Keynes, you've heard of him. He's probably the most famous economist anywhere. I think he was a member of Parliament for the Conservative Party, but the policies of the Labour Party are based on his teachings and all over the world. Now, this man is on record of saying that governments extract the wealth of the population secretly and unobserved, and not 1 in a million detect the theft. Now then, those are policeman's words. Detect and theft. He is telling us it's a crime, clearly. And he's telling us it's a secret crime, because it's not brought to justice. He possibly doesn't want to get any further because it can be bad for your health if you get too deeply into this crime. And I'm going to tell you something you all know now. There's only 2 ways to get money. One is the honest way to produce something useful and sell it, and or a service, and the other way is through trickery and fraud. Nobody knows. I've got a letter from a merchant bank who read this book that I've got, who said that he studied for 7 years and got a first-class degree, and he was a high flyer. And he said nobody ever explained to him how money worked. Nobody understands it. And this is my little effort here, is to try and get people money is boring, but it is so important. Money is, you also know that money is the ultimate control mechanism. If you've got a shower of money pouring over you into your hands, unstoppable, so much of it you can't use it all. and everyone else is in penury, gagging for it, then everybody is in your power. You control it all. It's the ultimate control mechanism. So, I want to try and get you to understand the secret, and the best way I've thought of doing it is, it's often said, you've probably already heard this, that oil in a car engine is as money is to the economy. It's a medium. The oil in the car lets all the moving parts work. Without it, it seems up. Money is just a token. It doesn't have value. It just represents value. And it allows all of the trades and everything to happen. Without it, the economy wouldn't work. So they're both mediums, and they're similar in every way. They both have a cost. You've got to get the oil out of the ground, you've got to transport it, you've got to refine it, you've got to put it in a can, you've got to sell it. It has a price. So is money. It's a piece of paper, has a cost, has to be printed. It's not much of a cost, but it has to be printed. Although most money is just sort of keynotes on a computer, but somebody's got to be paid to do it, so they both have a cost to get. Then you've got to get them into the system. Well, what do you do? How does it get into the system? The oil is poured into the car engine. The Treasury have all our money from taxes. They pour it into the economy. They spend it on the army and the NHS, and that's how it gets into the system. Also, more money. This is how it begins. Now, can I reach it with this? This subject that only 1 in a million understand. If you went to the garage and said, I want a gallon of oil, and the garage man said, there it is, sir, but next year, or the year after, you've got to give that oil back to me, and every month, until you don't, you've got to give me a pint of oil. Does anybody here think that's reasonable? Would anybody go for a deal like that? You'd find another garage. You wouldn't do it. But this is how we receive money. It's totally illogical. So how do they work? How does it work? How do they do it? Well, the government the Treasury have all this money pouring over us, over them, that they get from our taxes. And they don't spend it back in. What they do is they go to the Bank of England and they say, look, we've got all this money coming in, so give us some money. And the Bank of England say, right, they write out a cheque for Humpty Dumpty millions of pounds, and the Treasury give them an IOU for Humpty Dumpty millions of pounds. But there's nothing in the bank account of the Bank of England. And the logic is, their cheque has value because it's balanced by this IOU they've got from us. Now, does this mean that when this valueless token is borrowed into existence, and as soon as it's used, it gains whatever it's swapped for, the house, the car, and whatever it is. When it gets paid back, this is money being hoovered out of the system continually. That's the alchemy of double entry bookkeeping. And politics is above politics. There's nothing to do with politics. On the extreme left, you've got Joe Stalin, who's supposed to have torched 1,000 villages and, according to Solzhenitsyn, murdered 60 million people. On the other side, in the city of London, you've got that's left politics. On right politics, you've got bankers paying themselves millions of pounds each in bonuses, and there's people sleeping on cold, hard pavements within a few hundred yards. This is where politics brings us to. The secret is understanding this money system, which we're all living on this global free-range tax farm. We're all being farmed like cattle. I don't have time to read you this, but I could read you a statement by Montague Norman, who was the governor of the Bank of England, who's describing exactly all of this. You can Google him up and find him. He says that when people are made homeless, they're much more easily to control. And if I have time, I will tell you that. Now, a clue to all of this is world debt is 3 times world GDP. Can you smell the fish there? Who on earth has got enough money to loan to the world 3 times its turnover? I mean, how do you get this? How many cars do you have to sell, or aeroplanes, or haircuts, or pints of beer, so that you can hold this and save it and lend it to the world? How on earth can this happen? Does this mean every time you buy a pint of beer, because you contribute to world GDP, every time you buy a pint of beer, does that mean somebody somewhere is owed the value of 3 pints of beer? Who has this cash? A sixth of world GDP, that's 16 or 17% of the money which is generated in our country, in every country, is used just to pay the interest on this fictitious loan. In America, it's 20%, 18-20%. 20% of the working week is a day. Does that mean that 1 day a week in America is spent, everybody just paying interest on this debt, which actually doesn't exist? Similarly, the whole thing's based on fraud. If you buy a house, you go to the bank, you go to buy a house, and the bank say, well, there's here's a cheque for, we'll credit your account, that's the way they say it, with £250,000. And if you don't, if you default in your payments, we'll come and claim the house. And they make sure that you're able to, you've got a good job. They don't actually loan you a penny. What happens is they create brand new money, which is right, because somebody's created a house, you've got to create the tokens to represent that house. But in the next 30 years, you will pay for 3 houses, and they haven't lent you a penny. It's fraud. That is fractional reserve banking. If there's time, I'll get a bit more closely into that. The fact is they don't have a penny. They haven't stolen from us with trickery and theft. The proof of this is in 2008. You have to go cap in hand to the IMF and we have to live frugally, and we have to be responsible. They have the banks and the banking system have the money, but when they hit the wall in 2008, the only people who've got any cash at all to stump up the cash to get them out of the problem was us. That tells us everything. They haven't got any money, they get it all from us. I'm sorry, Tim, this is getting a rant, I mustn't rant. So, right. Well, the solution is, and it's not a new solution, it's been tried, not tried, it's very much in history. Instead of the Treasury borrowing from the central bank, by the way, it was, I know it's nationalised with smoke and mirrors now, but the American federal bank, the Fed, is 12 private banks. Instead of borrowing the money in the way that I described, in the way that you would never buy oil, if the Treasury just spent the taxes that they received from us, there would be no interest. And this is not new. If you look at, the easiest example is Abraham Lincoln, who was prosecuting his war against slavery. and he was paying 25% interest because he could have lost it. He understood what I'm talking about, so he created his own money. It was called the greenback. You've all heard of that. Before that, it was the silver dollar. Just before the end of the war, it's often not good for your health if you try and counter this banking system. He got a bullet in the head. John Kennedy, 100 years later, did exactly the same thing. He issued an executive order, I can't remember the number, that the next tranche of money to be borrowed would not be borrowed from the Federal Reserve, the 12 private banks, but would be issued by the Treasury. Within a year, he was dead. I don't know how, and there's many examples. In America, there's a lot of presidents being murdered all over this system. And if you go to England, if there's anything like real history ever taught in England, you would know that usury was forbidden in ancient England by King Alfred until the moneylenders came over, probably funded the invasion of William the Conqueror. And within, so I've discovered by reading about it, within a couple of generations, a quarter of the lands in England were in the possession of moneylenders. The richest man to die in England in, I don't know, early 1200s, was a bloke called Aaron of moneylender of Lincoln, and he died richer than the king. Another king came along, Edward I, in the early 1300s. I'm telling you this to show you that this is possible, it can be done. And he outlawed usury. And he introduced a system where they used money sticks for hundreds of years, from the early 1300s right through the 17th century. They'd get a stick and cut it in half, and this paid for all state expenditure. The stick was loaned out, and when it was returned back, interest-free and debt-free, it paid for all state expenditure. They were all burnt in the 17th century. But this is, I can't believe I only just discovered this. It was the beginning of a golden age in England. In England, then there were 160 to 180 holy days a year, holidays. That's where we get the word from. Now, 160, that's not including Sundays, 160, how many months a year is that for the labouring man? Holidays. That was a golden age. It all came to the end in Queen Elizabeth's time, when goldsmiths were thrown out of Spain, and they right here, they said they were Christians, and they were goldsmiths, and because they had gold, they made gold goblets, they dealt in gold, and ornaments with gold. They had to have a vault for security. And if anybody had any gold, and in those days money was gold, they would give it to the goldsmith and pay him. This is the beginning of banking, original banking. And someone would go to the goldsmith and say, look, I want to buy all of these fields which are up for sale and double the size of my farm. Lend me a gold bar. And the goldsmith would say, yes, but it's not my gold bar, and you might lose it. It's got to stay here, because there's no security if I loan it to you. And the deal would be, the farmer would say, I'll pay you back 2 gold bars when I've saved enough money in 20 years. So he would write a piece of paper out and say, this is worth a gold bar, and I'm an important person in society and everybody trusts me. Here is this piece of paper to represent this gold bar. And in 20 years' time, he'd get back 2 gold bars. And 9 other people would come along and say, I want to build the bank. And he would write out 10 certificates, but he's only got 1 gold bar. That is fractional reserve banking. This is the banking system we have now.
John,
Okay. How long have I got, Tim?
You've just gone over, yeah.
Oh, I better stop.
Yeah. So, is that okay?
Can I just round up just by saying one thing?
Okay.
There are things we could do. What we have to do is to get everybody to understand what, in this garbled way I've tried to explain to you. It's really hard to do in 15 minutes. If you go on the web, there is an organisation called the New Chartist Movement. The old Chartist Movement, I don't know if you know this, they got the vote for every male over the age of 21 back in the early 1800s. They were the ones that were, I think the origins of them, they were cut to pieces by the yeomanry in Manchester. Peterloo Massacre, there's a film about it in Hastings at the moment. If you go on their website, they will talk about this, and they will talk about the Bradbury pound. In 1914, there was a run on gold, and they thought that the economy was going to crash. So they closed the banks. They had a great meeting. Lloyd George was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and they issued, John Bradbury was the Treasury Secretary, and the Treasury issued the money. And it was called the Bradbury pound, and it was a great campaign to bring back the Bradbury pound. There's a lot of... I'll just say one more thing. In the House of Commons, next to the Speaker, in front of the Speaker, there's a man you've never heard of. You've heard of the Speaker. He's called the Remembrancer, and he represents the City of London. And he makes sure, nobody quite knows why he's there, but I suspect he's there to make sure that nobody has this conversation that we're having now. Okay, sorry, Tim.
That's all right. Is that okay? Is that a good time?
This one?
Good time to pause it?
Is it?
That, yeah.
Well,
okay?
no, I've got another 15 cards.
Well, I think for time,
yeah,
we'll have to. But if you just hang on there, can we thank John? There might be some questions. So thank you very much, John.
Sure.
Are there any questions for John about Bitcoin? Anybody have any questions about Bitcoin? Or money of any nature?
I was just wondering,
yes.
when you first actually started looking at this?
I tell you, it was 10 years ago. I was skiing. There was a woman standing next to me, and I think her husband was a high flyer in the bank. And she said to me, money is dead. It doesn't really exist. I don't really think she understood the significance of it. But I questioned her the next day. We talked about it, and I was like a dog with a bone. I couldn't let it go. And it took me ages to dig this through and understand it all. And the thing is that it's so simple that the human brain can't take it in. And it's such a scam, you can't believe it. And the other thing, and because we've always lived with it, we've always had this habit. And the problem is, the people that have this money cascading over them, that they can control everything. They control all of the information from Hollywood to the schools, and I do mean the schools, or everybody else would know about Edward III and the money sticks.
Any other questions? Sorry, any other questions for John before? Yes.
Can I just make a statement,
yes,
rather than ask a question?
Yeah, go.
For our plumber in the room, the best version of Keynes's formula was actually produced by a plumber.
Of what form?
A plumber. He produced a machine that translated Keynes's formula on how economics worked, and he did it using fluids controlled by taps and valves, and that was how he did it. And I think it's in the Science Museum now.
Yeah. Fabulous.
Just try and remember what I said about the car and the oil. Also, I have a book that, I know these things are not supposed to be, I'm not here for commercial reasons, but I've got a book I can sell you.
But you don't have to pay with money. John has got a book here, so that's fine. If you want to have a word with him. Any final questions for John? Yes, one final question.
There's a new economic theory called donut economics. Have you come across that?
I've seen the book. I've looked at the survey of it, and I suspect the person who hasn't got a clue doesn't know what I've just explained to you.
Okay. Well, can we thank John for Bavard?